Welcome, everyone, to the Language of Light with Jesper Raun. My name is Elizabeth Rangard, and I'm the IALD Director of Marketing and Communications. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping notes. If you have any questions for the speaker during the presentation, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to type your questions. We'll take questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat function, and an IALD staff member will respond to you privately in chat. Finally, this session will be recorded and available after the conference. Your microphones will be muted and cameras turned off for the duration of the session. Jesper Raun originally studied architecture in Copenhagen, Denmark. After practicing for several years, he focused entirely on light and its interaction with architecture. Today, he leads the lighting design work at Gottlieb Paludan Architects, an international practice with over 100 employees based in Denmark and Norway. Now let's hear from Jesper.
Hello, I am Jesper Raun. Welcome to my flat in Copenhagen, Denmark. I'll be talking about how to communicate light. I was trained as an architect and I worked as such for years before seriously turning to light. I'm still an architect, I'm just working with light. I do that at an architect's office and I have around 100 colleagues in offices in Norway and Denmark. The image you see is from our Copenhagen office, where I sit in the core design team, assisting in developing our signature projects and competition entries. My job is to be the light architect, making light a substantial part of the project. In this very short presentation, I will share with you some of my observations on how light can be communicated so it is understood and so that it makes the audience enthusiastic and confident. You could call that speaking the language of light. Just to give you an idea of my topic, I'd like to show you this picture. It's an underground station in Copenhagen we designed a few years ago. I'm not sure the client would have gotten much of a kick while reading the competition entry text if we had written that our goal for the nighttime situation was 2 candelas per square meter for the general lighting and a gradient from 50 candelas to 0 along the length of the ventilation columns. These, by the way, are 4000 K as a contrast to the 3000 K canopy lights. I don't think that would have helped us win this competition. My obvious point is that you have to talk and write about light in a way that will make your audience listen and understand. Badenbach contributed to the lighting design in this project. I am sure you've been in situations when you expected everybody else to understand you without realizing that actually they didn't. And that calamity only gets worse when those listening to you think they understand you, but they don't. What they hear is not what you said, but you and they both think the message got through. That is a recipe for disaster. In lighting design, what you want others to understand is the narrative of your design. It's the charm and the delight. It's the storytelling. It's the connection between the light and the architecture. It's about what the light does to people and how they experience it. It's also about breaking down barriers and getting a perfect collaboration going. PQR contributed to the lighting design in this image. In short, it's about communicating your profession professionally to non-professionals. Putting yourself in the shoes of your audience is crucial. Just think how lost you would be if you went to your doctor and asked, "Am I okay, doctor?" And your doctor would start sounding like a medical journal. You wouldn't know if you were in perfect health or on the brink of death. You may think that it's different when it's about light. I mean, we all have eyes and the light shines right into them. So light should be obvious to everyone. Well, it's not. And that's actually an important point. Light is not obvious. Just because you can see it doesn't mean you understand it. In fact, it's not certain that you see something the same way as others do. Just look at these examples. When my wife lights a candle, a very Danish thing to do, it's all about a good mood, relaxation, and hygge. Our Catholic friends from Spain, on the other hand, would see this candle and instinctively believe that someone had died. Joy is not the first thing they see. When the rainbow appears, someone will think of a crock of gold, or of someone pretending to be a unicorn riding across that rainbow, or perhaps of a parade. Lighting designers will think of Newton's prisms in the raindrops and why the blue light is so faint. We get very different experiences out of the same thing. When I see this street in Copenhagen, I appreciate the low uniformity and I enjoy the color temperatures. I see how interestingly the church tower is lit to guide the eyes upwards, and see how well the light sources are retrofitted into the old gas lights. Others will think this street is full of frightening dark corners. We really do see things very differently, depending on our culture, background, profession, and so on. And let's face it, light is not a thing which very many people have a trained eye for. With little knowledge about light goes a limited language for explaining the experience of light. Of course, that's not to say that the average person has no feelings for light. On the contrary, and that's actually important for the good light communicator to remember. Let me give you an example of how these strong feelings about light may surface. Perhaps you've tried discussing a nighttime streetscape situation with someone who isn't happy with it. Often you will hear the same complaint. There's too little light. When the light feels bad, that's an obvious remark to make. After all, what else might be wrong when the lighting doesn't feel good? As a lighting designer, you will know that your job is to look behind those words, not take them literally. There's too little light is a symptom of something not being the way it should be. The last thing you should do is just get more light. Those were a few examples of how differently realities may be perceived. Now, let's look a bit more on how to open up the eyes of the observer by the use of words. You see, your words can be a tool to help someone see, observe, and form an opinion. Let me give you an example. I'm involved in the Copenhagen Light Festival as a co-curator and as a guide. I get to walk through the darkness of Copenhagen at night for an hour or two during festival nights to present the art pieces to the audience. I make stops on the way from one art piece to the next to point out everyday light and talk about it. It could be this streetscape from before and the way the church tower is lit, or something about the color temperature or the pleasure of low uniformity, or how we actually can feel safe and secure even when the light is quite low, perhaps. These are just little observations from the city of our everyday lives, but the group gets to pay more attention to what they see and experience during the walk, and this prepares them for the next art pieces. A few years ago, after one such walk, a woman came up to me and said that she had lived in Copenhagen for half a century and never seen the city the way she saw it that night. Clearly, she had been using her eyes, but never with any understanding of what she saw in the dark. She was really surprised, and so was I. This made me realize that we can only really understand something if we have the language for it. With no words for it, we can't really see it. This, of course, applies to anyone, not just elderly ladies in Copenhagen. Even those you would expect to be more conscious of what they see may be unable to do that if they lack the framework, the words, to transform their vision into an experience. And now it gets closer to home. I may as well point in the direction of the people of my own profession, the architects, and talk about how they see light. If you're a lighting designer and ever worked with an architect, you may have made the surprising observation that a lighting designer and an architect don't necessarily meet eye to eye. It's strange, isn't it? Both are designers, both work in the field of creativity and visual value, and still a lighting designer can be left to wonder why their contribution isn't appreciated more. Lots of lighting designers complain how architects are notoriously difficult and how they really don't understand what a lighting designer is and does. First, let's be honest. Nobody is born to know what a lighting designer is. I'm sure you've been through a lot of explaining to get even your mother to understand. So why would an architect get the point with no word of explanation? Lots of people, architects too, respond to the word lighting designer by thinking three things. It sounds expensive, it must be about the shape and look of luminaires, and it's probably not really necessary. On top of that, few architects are keen to invite another designer into a project. The architect is the designer. Don't expect the architect to know much about light as such. He or she is likely to have very little education in that field. Most architects will have heard some great professor explain or even proclaim that light is very important and architecture is nothing without light. It all sounds very impressive, and we all know it's true. But while the professors at the architecture schools can teach you how to create architecture, it's my experience that very few include light into that process. Let me just show the observations we shared earlier. Don't expect everyone to understand what you mean. Don't assume people experience the same as you do. You can't see what you don't have the words for. And even close professions, architects and lighting designers, don't share views. Knowing why architects and lighting designers don't always understand each other is the first step towards overcoming the barriers and starting a fruitful collaboration. If you're a lighting designer, you have to approach someone who doesn't see or understand light the way you do in a way that opens that person's eyes up. Again, this is where the language of light comes in. So, how could you approach an architect in a manner which is likely to create interest? First, remind the architect there's probably going to be light of some sort in the project, somehow. Very few projects are just dark. And that light doesn't come by itself. Someone has to figure it out. And who might that be? Well, an engineer can work out some light to meet the legal requirements, or a sales representative can do the same, plus perhaps add a few effects here and there. Or perhaps a lighting designer could assist by first identifying and supporting the architectural point of the project and working from there, building on the basic idea, in other words. Now, how does that sound? You will want to have the architect explain the point, the very soul of the project to you. What is the architectural idea? If, for example, you're working on a church, it should feel sacred. How is that achieved architecturally? How is that experienced? The next question might be how light could support whatever that idea is. Should the light come from above or perhaps from the side? Should it be cold or warm? What is the balance between the darkest and the brightest spots that you see? What is meant to attract the eye? What does light do to the space? What could enhance the architectural experience and assist and develop the concept? We are working our way into understanding the performance of the light, as you can hear. Now, this experience that you've just taken the architect through is exchanged now to a more precise description. To achieve the effect, we need warm ambient light to fill this space, for example. We need these walls to be bright. We have to graze this highly textured surface. Or we need all eyes to be attracted here. What can we put here for that purpose? Which architectural element might we be able to use? Now, this is the point when the architect will start thinking that the lighting designer isn't such a strange person after all. The surprise is there is still not a word about luminaires. In fact, luminaires come last on the list of questions to answer. A procedure like the one I just described is likely to win over the architect. This kind of communication will almost certainly make the architect realize that it's not about luminaires, it's about light. I mentioned before the classical idea that lighting design is expensive. If someone is worried about light being a waste of money, you could address that concern by explaining the value of light. When the light is wrong, it reduces value, it costs money, it ruins business, and you end up losing money if it isn't perfect. Now, look at this underground parking. We all know how that can feel. And to be quite honest, this is a particularly nasty one I picked. But when a parking like this one is done, illuminance and uniformity are usually the only two boxes to tick. Nobody thinks further in terms of light. But if you build an underground parking and you want a decent return of investment, you want it full of cars. So to light a parking in such a way that no women dare park their car in it, you will lose half of your customers. That's a miserable business case for sure. The right light adds value, plain and simple. They know that in cozy restaurants or in supermarkets that sell red tomatoes, brown bread, and juicy meat. As a lighting designer, it's your job to explain this. Speaking of values, often a lighting designer is seen by other professionals as someone dealing in soft values. Soft in this context is something nice to have if funds are unlimited. But strictly speaking, soft is clearly unnecessary. Of course, the soft values you represent are the contrary of hard values, those that can be accounted for, those that can be counted, the values that count. If something cannot be counted, it's soft. Well, in a way, it's true. As a lighting designer, you definitely represent the soft values, as nobody else does. It's soft against hard, apparently. Now, the question is how to turn soft values into hard arguments. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom level, you have the physiological needs, the air we breathe, the food we eat, etc. One tier further up, you have the safety needs, your health, personal security, and so on. On the third tier comes love, among other things, and now we are into the territory of soft values. Further up, it gets softer still, with things like self-esteem, freedom, and self-actualization. Now, look at this image from a theater of operations. The patient is sedated and unconscious. Doctors and nurses monitor the blood pressure, the oxygen levels, the heartbeat, etc. These are hard values, something you can count and measure. The patient is alive. The hard values are accounted for. The doctors and nurses monitor the lowest levels in the hierarchy of needs. This is what life looks like for a patient whose hard value needs are met. The soft values are completely absent for the patient at this moment. The hard values are boxes to tick. The soft values, those that make life meaningful, cannot be provided by any doctor. Remember this the next time someone tells you that the soft values you represent are unnecessary icing on the cake. Let me finish by showing you two projects we've done at Gottlieb Paludan Architects, where light has been very important and where the process has been helped by very direct communication about light. This is a rendering of the future central fire station in Oslo. This is our winning project in the open design competition earlier this year. At the moment, it's out in tender, so we have no images yet of the finished building. The building's lower levels hold the fire trucks. It's lit in cool light coming from linear, almost streamlined luminaires, signaling efficiency, readiness, and technical attention. The upper level, on the other hand, is where the firefighters stay during their 24-hour shifts. They cook and eat, they exercise, they watch TV, and they sleep. They also unload after a stressful job, which sometimes involves life and death. The human upper level of the building reveals itself by the warm light and the emphasis of the wooden ceiling structure, where tunable white luminaires are mounted in each single ceiling cassette. That's what you can see in this image from a full-scale mock-up we did of one ceiling cassette. Downstairs, it's all about vigilance. Upstairs, everything is centered around normality, spending pleasant hours while waiting for a fire. The fire station expresses this duality in a very direct way, both architecturally and in the illumination. The fire station reflects the value we attribute to the fire brigade: security and readiness, strength and order, attention and foresight. At the same time, the design reveals that the firefighters are people of flesh and blood who sit around waiting to rush out and save people's lives. In this example, it's all a matter of the color temperatures, the connection between light and wood, and the shape and distribution of the luminaires themselves. The client was very happy with the way the building and the illumination go hand in hand to express the function and the purpose. The client felt that the light was part of the storytelling about what a fire station is and how it matters to the city of Oslo and how it engages with the public. The firefighters, well, perhaps you wouldn't expect them to care much for a detail like how their future workplace was lit, but they listened carefully to the narrative about how the building would look and feel, both in the day and during the night. And they really paid attention and felt the light was made to meet their needs when we got to the tunable white light, which would be helping them with their sleep-wake cycle. They really felt like working in this fire station. Light Bureau Oslo has contributed to this lighting design. The straightforward explanation of how a building in two levels with two functions is expressed in two different illumination concepts helped us define the key narrative about this building. And that continues to express the core concept of the building. The language of light has been applied in different ways to different audiences and has helped everyone getting a clear idea of the importance of light. Once such a story is told, it's difficult to disregard. It sticks in everyone's memory, and that increases the chances that the project will be built as intended. The second case is a control room for this well-known waste management plant near Copenhagen. The plant is in operation day and night, and so of course is the control room, which is the only part of the plant that we designed. The operators were engineers, and they were tired of the architect showing them drawings which were hard to understand and hard to relate to. They were a bit negative, to be honest. Then we started talking about the light. At day, you will feel that the bluish coal light suggests the presence of a large skylight overhead. The blue light is there to make the daylight seem stronger. You will be aware of darkness falling because as it does, the light in the control room will dim slightly and the color temperature will be warmer. The blue coal light will turn to warm white, enhancing the color and materiality of the wooden panels. This will make the large space feel more intimate and cozy in the evening, more like a home than a workplace, almost. At all times, the round luminaires in the ceiling will connect the control room interior with the dramatic facade outside, making you remember that you're working in this awesome plant, which everybody knows so well from its striking facade. The guys got it. They thought it was great. They knew all too well how it feels to work long, lonely night shifts in strongly lit office spaces. They thought that for once, something was done to make for a comfortable night shift. The story, the narrative of the lighting was direct and emotional. A very simple presentation took them by the hand and walked them through an experience they could feel and relate to. Amber light contributed to this design. We've come to the end now, and I would like to conclude a little bit. We need to speak and write very clearly about light in order for the light to be understood. When everyone is knocking on the front door of rational argument, you can use storytelling to sneak out behind to where the back door of emotions is, and you will find it wide open. If you want to succeed, make sure you're understood. To address people in an engaging manner, put yourself in their shoes, identify with your audience. Use metaphors, create mental images, believe what you say, and prepare well. I think we're ready to take some questions now.
All right. Thank you, Jesper. You are on mute. Let's have you unmuted. What a wonderful session. I especially loved your ending takeaways. We have time for a couple questions in the audience. The first question I have for you is the language of light universal? Can it be adapted to every culture and language?
Yes, I would definitely say so. Yes, you know, you can talk about many professional matters, and it will all be rational. For example, I can talk about architecture and say, look, this space that we're in has this shape or that shape, and so on, and people will listen with a rational ear. But if you talk about light, something else happens. For example, if you say to someone, look, imagine that you walk into a very tall space and there is cold, cold light coming from the left. It's as if the light is coming out of ice, and it sort of washes along the walls, and the walls are rough, and you see the rough texture. That room has a very cold and strange feeling. But over there to the right, there is an opening, like a door, and the next room, the next space, seems to be almost well, orange with warmth, and the floor is reflecting it up. Just imagine how you will be attracted to that door and you will want to go there. You know, if you tell a story like that, I just made that up, you will be talking to people emotionally, and you don't need a background to be able to understand a story like that. And it's as if you talk to some place in people's brains which is just ready to listen, and which is almost, you know, like the part of the brain that listens to music. You could say that light is like visual music. You hold people's hearts in your hand when you talk about light, much more than if you talk about numbers or whatever it might be. So yes, I would definitely say it's universal. You're talking to something inside people, which is just lying there waiting to be ignited.
Thank you. We have another question here from the audience. The question is, I agree it's surprising how lighting designers and architects can sometimes have difficulties understanding each other.
Yeah.
Being an architect yourself, how do you experience that?
Yeah, well, you know, it dawned on me that we had this I wouldn't say conflict, but this strange relationship between architects and lighting designers a couple of years ago. That was actually in Barcelona, the IALD conference in Barcelona. And one of the talks was about a fruitful collaboration between a lighting designer and an architect. And, you know, I had to go and see that talk because I thought, well, is that really the topic of a talk? And the lecture hall was full of people, and they all just sat there listening to the architect and the lighting designer. They were both present. And I was absolutely stunned that this would be so important. A successful collaboration was so important. We wanted to talk about it at an international conference. So that's when I started realizing that we have something here. I would say in my everyday life, perhaps what I experience is that my colleagues, the architects, and whoever they need to talk to about light, they can be sales representatives or whatever, something, that both parties really appreciate that there's someone there who can mediate the debate. When I'm there, I'm sure that everyone understands each other and there are no conflicts or just misunderstandings. So, you know, those are the occasions when I think how easily things could go wrong, because you simply talk about different things and have different interests in a project. Yeah, maybe that's just it.
Well, Jesper, I think we could have people ask you questions for another 15 or 20 minutes, but we have come to the end of our session. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk about the language of light. It was fascinating.
Thank you for inviting me.